That summer, the day I learned to ride the rusty bicycle along the lane beside the river, the world widened with every wobble. The air was thick with heat and lilac. The gravel hissed softly under the tires, and the river wore a thin, patient line of silver where the sun split on it. I held the bike with both hands, knuckles pale, while May, my sister, stood behind me on the grassy verge, ready to catch me if I toppled, and to release me back onto the seat with a grin that said we could try again. The bike had a mind of its own, a stubborn green frame, chipped at the edges, where the paint had peeled away to show the dull metal beneath. It creaked with each forward breath, the pedals turning lazily as if the bike wanted to pretend it was still a child in a shed, playing at speed with the throttle of a wish. Its bell rang with a little reluctant chime whenever the road straightened and the lane opened into sunlight. A sound that seemed to call the whole world to attention for a moment, and then drift away like a bee that found nectar too soon. Daddy stood at the gate of the yard, his shirt dusty at the collar, his shoes caked with the road's memory. He watched us with a calm that felt almost holy in its steadiness. "Take a breath," he said, as if the lane were a living thing that could hear a breath and understand a resolve. May nodded, and I took a breath that tasted faintly of lemon and chalk, the summer's heat pooling in the hollow of my chest, warm and sure. Ma didn't come to the gate, not that day. She would have stood in the doorway, apron catching the light, calling out a handful of small instructions, but she stayed inside the house, folding laundry or perhaps listening to the radio with the door slightly ajar so the world could borrow a sound or two. It was enough that the air felt thick with possibility, that the lane stretched ahead like a line drawn in chalk on the earth's palm, promising a map of tiny victories. May coaxed me forward with a whisper that was almost a joke, her voice a thread of laughter in the heat. "Look ahead," she said, tapping the handlebars, as if the bike learned with me when I paid attention to the horizon. The river's breath came up from the green banks, the soft rush of water over stones, the distant cry of a kingfisher. The way the hedge along the road held all the secrets of summer in its shade. I pressed the pedals and found that moving was less a choice than a surrender. The bike, the road, and I, agreeing for a moment that we could pretend to be something braver than we felt. The first push was a stumble, a wild tilt to the right, a spill of laughter from May that landed in the grass like coins dropped from the sky. The skin on my elbow remembered the sting as a bright spark, and my mouth remembered the taste of summer dust and the ribbon of copper from the bike's chain. But I dragged myself up, dust on my knees and a stubborn seed growing in my chest, and I tried again. And again. Each attempt perforated fear with a new, patient courage. The courage to rise, to steady, to fling the front wheel toward the sun, and ask the wind to do its quiet work. Soon the lane opened into a straight stretch that felt like a promise, a ribbon of earth and sky, where I could pretend the world was not watching, where I could decide my own pace and learn what balance meant in the body's language. The bike settled into a rhythm that was almost a heartbeat, and the river, a silver audience, clapped with the distant clatter of water on stone. I learned to tilt my weight just enough to breathe out through my nose in half-slow sighs, to let the bike carry me forward without a shout or a cry, just a whispered acknowledgement of trust between machine and girl. May's hands never left the seat behind me, not until the line between us grew long enough that the road wouldn't swallow a fall whole. When I finally found a glide that felt more like a conversation than a battle, I looked back and saw Daddy at the gate, a small, proud tilt to his lips, and I heard Ma's door open and close in the distance, as if the house itself exhaled in relief. The lane had become a kind of classroom, and the river a patient mentor, and the bike a stubborn tutor that demanded a discipline I hadn't known I needed. That day-bound moment, when the world slowed enough for me to notice the soft drift of the heat over the fields, the way a bell of a distant church tolled not in opposition to the wind, but with it, the precise sweetness of a lemon wedged into a glass of ice water, taught me something simple and sturdy. It wasn't about speed or daring. It was about deciding to move forward even when the ground trembled under your feet and the future looked too wide to map. It was about showing up for your own self day after patient day until you found a version of yourself you could be proud to meet in the morning. Years later, when my hair has turned other wind salt at the temples, the skin of my hands bearing the map of a dozen quiet storms, I still hear that bike's bell, not as a nuisance, but as a small, faithful memory, calling me back to the moment I learned to ride toward the horizon and let it pull me a little into becoming someone who could endure, who could forgive, who could keep moving when the way was not easy. The lane is different now, grown over in places, the hedges taller, the river farther away in memory, yet the lesson remains clear. Progress is a patient animal, fed by practice, steadied by a friend's steady presence, and warmed by the conviction that the world does not end where fear ends, but begins to widen again. In old age, I tell this memory to grandchildren, who lean close, their faces bright with curiosity and disbelief that a girl could have learned to fly on a bicycle without leaving the ground. I tell them that the first ride did not end with a trophy or a ribbon, but with the soft, forgiving turn of a life that learned to lean into the wind instead of away from it. I tell them that the path to becoming who you are is paved not with grand gestures, but with small, stubborn choices, over and over, until the ground beneath you becomes familiar and your heart learns to trust its own rhythm. Sometimes I walk along the same lane alone now, the air cooler, the river quieter, and the memory returns like a breath I've learned to hold and release at just the right moment. I lean on a memory that grew up with me, a map drawn not in ink, but in the slow, faithful movement of a child on a bike and the hands of a sister who kept the world in balance behind her. Time has threaded new stories through my days, yet that single ride remains a bright thread I pull, whenever I need to remember where courage begins, with a small push, a shaky start, a bit of fear, and a choice to keep going. I am grateful for that stubborn girl who learned to ride that summer, for the family who stood at the gate with quiet patience, for the river that offered a mirror for the heart, and for a road that promised, if you believed in it long enough, that you could move towards something bigger than your fear. The meaning of that day did not shout at me, did not demand to be etched in stone. It settled gently, like light in a room at dusk, turning ordinary seconds into something lasting. And now, when I think of what endurance looks like, I think of a bicycle on a sun-browned lane, and I am reminded that the heart remembers what the mind forgets. And that gratitude, slow and sure, outlives the summer heat and the passing years. Chime moves on, yes, with its quiet, unyielding hands, yet meaning, that stubborn, patient thing stays. It stays in the soft ache of a back that remembers the weight of handlebars and the arc of a hopeful trajectory. It stays in the sound of a bell that rang not to command the world, but to invite a girl to try again. And so I keep faith with that memory, with the little victory that began a life of leaning into the wind. For if the summer taught me anything, it is this: to move forward is to become, and to become is to carry with you a light you found along the way, a light you can return to when even the road grows long and the day grows unsure. And for this I am grateful. The unspoken wisdom tucked in a child's courage, the soft reminder that meaning endures, even as the season changes and the world keeps turning.